So where do you think the world's tallest building will be in 2050, and why?
Well, actually, I think it's going to be in Africa.
Interesting.
It's the last frontier. It's just starting to come into its what we would call industrial revolution phase, although it's going to be a very different development than past industrial revolutionized countries. China and India being kind of the most recent big scale. But it's a continent of 1 billion people, 54 countries, a tremendous amount of natural resources. Also, there are countries that are interested in expanding there. One of them being the Chinese, and so I could imagine, kind of an intersection of technology and wherewithal at the same time. Being in a place that will undoubtedly have a tremendous identity that they're capturing. The other interesting thing about the country is, oftentimes people kind of stop their demographic projections at 2050, thinking that that's probably enough to look out. But if you look at the end of this century and right before 2100, that continent could be as much as 5 billion people. So,
wow.
Typically, although the Middle East is a little bit interesting anomaly in terms of tall buildings vis-a-vis population size. It's small population but with big buildings, where China and other parts of the world are much more about, okay, population's big, so there's going to be a lot of development. I think Africa is going to be one of those places where there has to be a lot of tall buildings just because of the population, and I do think somebody will do a signature building.
And that's interesting that you would see that knowledge sharing, leaders from Lagos or Johannesburg going to China to get the knowledge about how do you adapt to a massive influx of people moving into the city.
Right, yeah.
How many floors, what height do you think that building might be?
Wow, there's, in fact, the gentleman who built the Burj Khalifa, Mohammed Alabar, was at a conference and ran into him, and he's a very, obviously very energetic guy, and I said hello and introduced myself, and he remembered me from the conference in Dubai, and he said that he wants to build a building a mile tall. He's also doing work in Africa, by the way. He's working in 4 different countries there.
Which ones?
I think it's Ghana, Senegal, Rwanda, and one other that I can't remember. Okay. But not maybe the typical ones like South Africa or Nigeria, but the ones that are really kind of at the beginning. And I think he's doing things like hotels and residences at the moment. But I could see somebody like that. Who has the experience, that is, looking at a place that is, the next future. But yeah, I think, that next height that people are going to try to get to is a mile.
We've done a kilometer. So we've done a kilometer. So.
Well, it's under construction, so we'll see if they get there or beyond. But I think that next, round number is 1 mile, and that will, so let's say it's a mile, and it's in Africa, and it's probably 200 and some floors, 250 or something like that.
That'll be certainly interesting to see. So if you could select a major tall building design, construction, operation, or management topic that you think needs more research, what would it be and why?
It's hard to single out one. I mean, one of the things that I tried to do as the chair was to really kind of bring to the surface, well, why are we all here together? And we're just such a broad group of people, from developer owners to, people that are selling elevators, and, it's everything in between. And what is it we're really striving to as an organization, other than just collecting all that information, packaging it, and spitting it back out, but really this idea of performance and innovation. That should be what we're focused on. When we can find something that is about innovation, we should be all over it. And in fact, as part of my chairman term, we instituted the Performance Award, we instituted the Innovation Award, and those came from talking with our Board of Trustees and Anthony about, look, we need to somehow up the game. We need to make it more visible that that's what we stand for. So I think I could still say that those are areas where we really need to keep pushing. In many ways, if you think about the tall building and in the high rise, yes, there's a lot of sophistication. We're doing a lot of formal things, but in a sense, they're not that much different than they were in the 50s when they started to become very prevalent around the world.
What advice would you give to someone who is considered to be a CTBUH leader?
Yeah. I've thought about it a lot just in reflecting on the last 3 years that, my interface, my kind of own personal path to and through the council has been through some people that I really looked up to and admired. The first was Leslie Robertson, and in fact, he's the gentleman that introduced me to the council in many, many years ago.
What do you remember about that?
Well, I mean, Les was, I'm not sure he was the chair at the time, but he definitely was a guy that was wanting to promote. He saw me as a young guy, and
do you remember what he told you?
We were working on a project. I think the specific discussion I can't really remember, but the idea that I came away with is that this is a global organization. This is a group that's very interested in Les is a very innovative guy, so I connected innovation with the council. So my direct interface with the council, in fact, was I was designing a building in Tokyo. It was one of the first tall buildings I had designed, and I was really grasping for straws in terms of the information. And I was able to pick up at the office that I was working at. They had a conference document from the Sydney or Melbourne, was one of the Australian conferences. And in that were articles about elevators and about wind testing and things that were really important and were presented at that conference. And I started reading through this, getting very knowledgeable, really good information and knowledge about the subject of high-rise buildings. And so that was really where I thought, heard about the council. Here's this document, very pertinent stuff for what I was challenged with.
Sure.
And then Ron Klemenczyk contacted me in 2005 to speak at the New York conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I spoke about a project that I was doing in Singapore. And that was really the first meeting that I went to with the council.
So that's looking back. How about looking forward? What would you like CTBUH to look like in 10 years?
Yeah, well, I think part of the plan of continuing to expand our membership around the world. I mean, the fact that 2 years ago we had virtually no members in China, but yet they were at the heart of the building boom. I think now we've got, I think they're the second largest membership group country-wise. So I think we need to keep doing that. I mean, there are places in the world like Turkey and Brazil that we still don't have, they're doing tall buildings, significant tall buildings, but yet we don't have enough representation. So I think the kind of expanding globally definitely is very important. I think it's hard to beat these conferences, and people have mentioned to me over the last few days that they go to a lot of these things, and it's just so refreshing to come here because it's action-packed and it's valuable information. There's a lot of great personalities here, and so I can't say that we should be doing 3 or 4 of these a year. In fact, I think we should just do one and keep it going. But I think this notion of the tall building really looking to a future in the world which isn't just about the elite. I mean, when you look at a lot of these significant buildings that are being done, they're not for everybody. Obviously, a building like Shanghai Tower makes a great statement for the people of Shanghai and China, but very few people are actually going to be able to go in and use that building.
Yeah.
And I think there's a side of what the tall building needs to do in this world that needs to be more for the masses. And I think whether it's research in those areas, or and I think a lot of that's going to depend on prefabrication. It's going to be something that's it's got to be a new technique of building that's much more economic and much more transportable. I think those are the things that I could see the council's getting into, and whether it's on R&D or in promoting it and going into places that could really use help in a way that really hasn't been planned or designed at this point.
Expanding the global reach of the organization.
Yeah, so there's kind of two things. One is continue to expand the global reach. The other is to kind of expand into areas where tall buildings actually are great solutions for the urban challenges they have. But it's not about building, a 600-meter tall building for a handful of very elite companies.
Right.
It's about how do you create tall buildings that's really about the future people in cities that are now on their way, migrating to those places. Yeah.
And what challenges, the way you put it, do you think tall buildings are best suited to address? What challenges do you think maybe they aren't so well suited to address?
Well, the big thing that the reason why we're tall buildings and urban habitat is To me, tall buildings and density are really important. And I can just use two cities, albeit slightly different populations. I mean, I live in New York, and the fact that I can kind of create a life where I live and I work and I hang out with my kids and things like that, all within a walking distance, is actually quite, with a lot of diversity, is actually, I think, really ideal. Cities like Shanghai have gotten not only so tall, but also so spread out, and then you start dealing with mass transit or cars and freeways and things like that. And I think, tall buildings in creating these really clustered cities that don't go on forever, but that actually have a real kind of containment to them, so that you can live, work, play, learn all within an area where you could walk freely. At the same time, so you've got a ground plane experience. At the same time, you've got a vertical experience with different uses. I mean, those are the things that I think are still, completely viable for the future. And at the same time, I know, there's a whole series of things that will happen socially, politically, economically, that will either make them work or not. Mm-hmm. And there's some great experiments. I think Singapore is a city that is probably as close to a diagram of what I'm talking about. It's an island that's only 20 kilometers tall and 40 kilometers wide, and not to say that you could walk that whole thing, but they create a kind of density and also a link with nature and mix of uses that no other city has quite gotten as good as they have. So that's a place I'm very fond of in terms of thinking about the future of the high rise in the city.
Yeah. So, last question. In your time as chair of Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat, what achievements have made you the most proud?
Yeah. There's probably two or three. I think the first is that we have expanded our membership, and we've expanded into places in the world that there is a lot of tall buildings happening, and I've spent a lot of time in those places in the world and been part and parcel to helping grow that. The second is in what I talked about before, in really trying to champion innovation as a key, and performance as a key differentiator or identity for the council. It's not just about bringing information, it's about the best information and how to improve things. And so a few of those programs with innovation awards, et cetera. So I'm very happy, and that'll be something that continues. And really I think the third is, treating my chairmanship timing as really how to stabilize or how to make sustainable, probably a better term, the legacy of the council. Mm-hmm. And we all sort of know that it's a lot more stable than it was in the past, with literally the chair would take the baton and would run it down the street a few years and then hand it off to somebody else, and it was kind of doing a zigzag. In fact, even Ron Klemenczyk, who more or less pulled the baton out of the fire, was almost at the end of its life, and kind of carried it a bit. So I think for me to work with Anthony and the board to really create the council as a legacy. I mean, we created a strategic plan, we created a focus in terms of what we want to do, what we don't want to do, and then at the same time we built a plan of how we were going to staff that and support that. And then once we said, look, these are the things that we can do, this is how many people, is to go back and make sure that it's sustainable, that we aren't fiscally getting out over our skis, and making sure that the council is something that doesn't have to worry about a downturn or this or that would really risk the legacy that we've created. And I think that's anything that has a life as long as the council, having started in 1969, to really think about the legacy of the council and how you formulate a plan for the future that everybody can feel safe about, good about, clear about. I think that's probably, at the end of the day, the thing I'm most proud of.